On today's podcast, a rare individual, someone who can actually have a rational, calm conversation about current events. I'm Ted Smith, and today one of our instructors from the Encore 55 program, Avery Fromet, has got some really interesting classes that he teaches, and I'd like to introduce him to you and get to know him a little bit with the rest of you as well. Avery, you are not a typical instructor. You're coming to this from the private sector. You were a lawyer, and help me out, you were a lawyer. You were a prosecutor first or a defense attorney first?
I was in general practice first, and I came from the corporate world, and I got my first job on Buckeye Road, and then from there I expanded, and eventually I was asked to be prosecutor for Beechwood for a couple of years, and from there I went into DUI defense, criminal law, and other commercial legal work.
And that was about 40 years?
Yes.
So maybe 15 of each, 15 prosecutor, 15 defense attorney?
Not really. A short period of time as a prosecutor, and then mostly criminal defense work, DUI defense work, and commercial for about 20 years. 20?
Mm-hmm. And what did you like better?
I liked the criminal work better.
Defense?
Defense. It was very interesting. I got to meet interesting people.
I bet. And at their worst, too.
Yeah, well, some actually weren't guilty of what they did. And it was very positive work. The outcome, for the most part, our judicial system is very interesting because usually the juries get it right.
And these are some of the classes that you are teaching at Tri-C's Encore program, looking at different legal aspects and...
Yeah, my first class at Tri-C was teaching the U.S. Constitution and the history. Then my second class was important Supreme Court decisions that changed America. So I was able to blend the constitutional law with the cases that I was presenting, which was very interesting. Now I've done other classes, but from what you're asking me, that was very interesting.
I have got to hear, every attorney I've ever talked to has that case that went sideways on them, or the unexpected outcome, or the really bizarre circumstances. You've got to have something like that.
Well, I've always said I want to write a book.
Yeah. Because
I've had cases that have gone both ways. I had a case where the facts were this guy didn't stand a chance. The facts are so against him. And the jury came back with a not guilty verdict. The judge, the prosecutor, and I both looked like deer in headlights.
A completely unexpected outcome.
Right.
Because the jury saw through the speciousness of the arguments, or?
I don't know, because the judge can poll the jury and ask what each person's verdict was. And then sometimes some judges will let you meet with the jury. This case, the judge wouldn't let us meet with the jury. So I have no idea where they came up with the not guilty.
Wow. Well, and when you alluded to a little bit that the justice system in this country is, right, they do their level best to get to the truth. Mm-hmm. But there are flaws in that, if you will.
And I wouldn't call it a flaw as much as evidence that's not presented, somebody not doing their job. Everybody in the courtroom has a job. The jury, the judge is there. He's the rule maker. He's the one to make sure that everybody does their job. The defense lawyer's job is to defend the defendant. Prosecutor's job is to do their job in prosecuting the case. And if everybody does their job, the jury gets it right.
Because no matter what the defendant looks like, no matter what their background is or what they do for a living or whatever, they have these constitutional rights.
And it's important as a defense attorney that you make sure, for example, if you're not going to have a client get on the stand, notwithstanding the fact that you're not required to get on the stand, and a common person is going to say, why didn't he get on the stand? So it's very important that at voir dire and opening arguments that you make sure the jury understands that he doesn't have to take the stand. And you have to make sure that the judge emphasizes that to the jury.
This is part of the Fifth Amendment.
Right, correct.
And so because if a defendant did if they did testify and they said something off the cuff, that sort of opens up a whole can of worms for...
Correct. Again, as a defense attorney, it's your job to see what kind of witness your client is going to make.
So are these the kind of things you talk about in your Constitution class?
Not a great deal about, but yes. When I talk about the Fifth Amendment, I talk about the Bill of Rights. We get into those types of discussions. I'm not going to say I do it in detail because when it comes to the history of the U.S. Constitution, there's a lot to go over in 7-week sessions. So I don't get into it in great deal, but I can't say that I don't get questions about it and explain it.
Okay. Well, and so is there any particular thing that the students usually ask you about that? Like they want to know why this or why that or what's going on in a current events class and how does this apply to the Constitution?
Yeah. For example, the first thing I'm going to teach is gerrymandering because that's a hot topic in Ohio. And I'm going to talk about the history and what happened and what the issues is with gerrymandering. And I want everybody to explain, I want everybody to understand that gerrymandering is not a new thing. I mean, the Democrats did it. Now that the Republicans are in charge, they're doing it. This started in 1810 when a guy named Jerry was elected governor of Massachusetts. And he started to gerrymander the state of Massachusetts.
You want to redraw the lines?
Sure, yeah.
That's favorable to you or your party.
Correct.
or whatever.
Yes.
And I think it's especially important, you tell me, I think it's especially important for like representatives going to D.C. to represent constituents in Ohio or Connecticut
right.
or wherever. And as you know, the more people there are in a state, the population, the more representatives we get.
Yes.
We get 2 senators, or we might get
you get in
30 or 40 representatives, depending on the population.
Correct.
And so a place like Toledo, where there's a bunch of people collected together, or a place like Findlay, where there's a bunch of people spread out, but there's not as many people, all of these, the way you draw those lines on the map represents, how many, who's going to represent what group.
Yes, and they draw these lines in such a way that they'll favor one party or the next.
It kind of makes the people who make jigsaws jealous. Like, I wish I could draw a puzzle piece like that.
if you looked at Ohio's districts, it is Captors, the woman, the representative from Toledo. She goes all the way from Maumee County along the Lake Erie to, I think, halfway through Lorain County. Then you have others that look like a semicircle going around Cuyahoga County. I don't have the map in front of me, but if you saw it, it's okay. It's a jigsaw puzzle. It's exactly, you've described it properly.
And so constitutionally, there's nothing that's speaking directly to drawing up these lines. It's still about, on paper anyway, how many people do we have in a state? How many representatives do we need? Mm-hmm. How do we figure out how these people are? So obviously, in your classes, there's going to be some people who might favor Democrats or some people might favor Republicans. How do you keep a level conversation without people getting into vitriol and making charges and counter charges and whatever? How do you conduct a class like that?
You stand between them. No, I mean, if I told you some of the, I try to keep my classes, I always start my con law, anything having to do that, saying, look, I'm not espousing any political position here, but this is the way it is. You know, I got started doing this because everybody wanted to impeach Trump.
Okay.
And and after they went through this long discussion, I raised my hand, and I said, can I say something? And they said,
now, you're
what?
A student at this point. You're
I'm
not
a student
teaching
at that
the
point,
class.
yes. And I said, you're never going to impeach Trump. Oh, what do you mean? I said, the Constitution.
You must be a partisan hack if you're saying something like that, right?
Well, I've never been known to keep my mouth shut.
but no, I mean, I'm kidding, because that's the level of discourse when I've said, I don't know that they're going to impeach him for real, and people go, oh well.
I said,
you're
look,
not saying it as a political perspective. You're saying it from a legal perspective.
From a constitutional standpoint, in order to impeach anybody, 2/3 of the Senate has to vote in favor of throwing them out of office. I mean, a lot of people have been impeached. They have not been found guilty by the Senate. You need 67 senators to vote for impeachment. And as with Clinton and Trump, their parties are not going to allow them to get impeached unless it's extremely serious offense that they can't help but do it. But that's never happened except during the Johnson administration after Lincoln. And then he missed being thrown out of office by one vote.
So Lincoln's vice president becomes president.
Correct.
And I'm forgetting John. Whenever Andrew, thank you. I always think of LBJ, but that's my right. That's another Johnson. And so, tell me a little bit about what happened to that guy. He was impeached.
What happened was Lincoln gets assassinated, and Lincoln wanted to institute a reconciliatory way of reincorporating the Confederate States back to the United States. And Johnson wanted to continue those issues. Well, you had war Democrats and Republicans who were vehemently against easy reconciliation.
There's a lot of hard feelings between both sides after that.
Oh, of course. The North had to keep federal troops in the South until I think around 1870 in order to allow governments to reconcile with the United States. But Johnson wouldn't go along with what the war Democrats and the Republicans wanted, so they decided to impeach him. Now, I don't know where there's treason or high crimes and misdemeanors, which is the requirement.
And that's a fairly broad term. I don't want to take you off your story because I want to hear the rest of this story. But high crimes and misdemeanors there's some latitude there about what that means.
It's an undefined term. And I think the Founding Fathers put that in to allow the flexibility of Congress to determine what is a high crime and misdemeanor. Okay?
There we go.
Yeah. So
back to Johnson.
Yeah. So what happened was that although they couldn't prove a high crime and misdemeanor, they voted, and the Senate I think they had, whatever the minority was, they didn't have 100 senators back then, but he missed being convicted by one vote. And that's the closest that any president has ever been to impeachment, by a long shot.
Right.
I personally think that Nixon was told by his colleagues, you better quit or there's going to be a serious, you're in serious, because it was a high crime and misdemeanor what he was doing. He was subverting the political system at the time. So I don't have any proof of that, but I think that there could have been serious impeachment proceedings against him.
Had he stuck with it.
Correct.
Well, and the thing, now, I was alive then.
Okay, good.
But, right, so I remember watching these things on the news, but not fully grasping it, right? Mm-hmm. What I've learned about it is more from history class. But if I remember the polling or the what would have been the election results, he was going to win by a landslide. What he did was foolishness or paranoia or whatever.
Exactly.
Whatever
Nixon
we want to
was
call
probably the most paranoid president. He had a hit list. He had who was on his list? Barbara Streisand was on his list. He had a list of people that I think, now don't get me wrong, I think he wanted the IRS to go after them. He had a hit list. And
he wouldn't be the last president to have a hit list.
Probably not. But, everybody, it was a perception of the general public that he knew this break-in was going to happen. Suspiciously, there's 15 seconds of a tape that are missing from what he turned over to the investigators.
Right.
And I'm sure there are things that
I thought it was 18 minutes.
Was it 18 minutes? Whatever it was. Yeah. Okay.
Arlo Guthrie once joked that Alice's Restaurant is an 18-minute song, and he said he probably had my recording of Alice's Restaurant on the tape at that.
Okay.
Just
but
bizarre
I'm sure
history.
They had evidence over and above what was disclosed to the general public.
Right.
So.
Well, and you once told me conversationally that when you went to law school, you took one class on the Constitution, which there are some lawyers who will focus on that as their Juris Doctorate. But you said the real learning about the Constitution came when you were practicing law as a defense attorney. So explain that a little bit.
Well, like any job, you learn it more from practical experience than you do from books. And nearly every case I had, defense-wise.
Is this the school of hard knocks?
Don't go that far, but I guess it depends on the judge you're in front of. But, every case is unique. There are issues. Did they have a right to stop? For example, on a DUI case, let me give you an example. Did the police have a probable cause to stop the vehicle? If they stop the vehicle, do they have probable cause to have him open the window? Do they have probable cause to pull him out of the vehicle? And do they have probable cause to make him do field sobriety tests? And then most importantly, did they have probable cause to arrest him or put him into custody? These are all unique issues that through the years have been defined by Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. And these are issues as a defense lawyer that you have to investigate over and above the facts themselves. I had a client who got stopped for speeding, and the police officer demanded that he open the trunk. He opened the trunk. The police officer zipped open his gym bag and found some marijuana in it. And they charged him with possession. Well, what was the probable cause to, when you get a ticket, you're supposed to give him a citation, and that's it. What probable cause did he have to demand that he open the trunk?
Right. Well, and I'm almost a little bit embarrassed too. I've been pulled over for speeding before.
Okay.
and no police officer has ever, and there's been multiple occasions when this has happened, has ever asked me, can I see inside your trunk? Now,
I'll give you 3 guesses, and I'm not going to put on this tape why this man they demanded he open this trunk. But I'm not going to, I don't want to get into that discussion. But there are instances where police officers go too far. In the majority of the cases, and don't get me wrong, police officers do the right thing. But
they're
is
well
that
trained usually.
Yeah, they're trained properly and they do things properly, and they're trained to do things properly.
Well, there's
but
good
once
lawyers.
in a while, you run into these instances where they go too far.
Right. There's good lawyers and there's bad lawyers. There's
Correct.
good plumbers and there's bad plumbers, and they try their level
Right.
best to have.
Right. And the good lawyers, the good plumbers, and the good cops are far
They're the majority.
Far in the majority of. And I'm not saying these cops are bad. I'm just saying they made a mistake.
Sure.
Okay?
And we're human and we all do that.
Correct.
I will tell you just a quick personal story. Like I was traveling on I-95, which is up the eastern seaboard, and I just come back from the Bahamas. And at the time in Virginia, they had toll booths there, like it was toll road 95. Yeah. And I was on my way up to Boston actually, and I'm at the toll booth, and this guy, I just hear this voice go, "Excuse me, sir, can I ask you some questions?" And I look up, and there's a state trooper walking up behind me. He didn't pull me over. I'm at a toll booth. And he goes, "Do you have any foreign money on you?" Well, I just come back from the Bahamas. So yeah, I had some Bahamian coins in my pocket or whatever. And I'm like, yes. And I was younger. I fit a certain profile. I'm in Virginia, but I don't have any, I had Ohio license plates. So I fit a certain profile. And he said, "Do you mind if I look in your car?" And because I had nothing that I thought I wanted to hide, I didn't have any marijuana with me or anything, right? So, sure. So we pulled over, and he spent 20 minutes rummaging through my car because that corridor at the time was a big artery for drug trafficking. And because I was younger and I had out-of-state plates, I fit a profile, and he didn't have probable cause, but he asked nicely.
That's the difference. He didn't have to have probable cause because you agreed to allow him to search your car.
Right.
That's an exception.
Yes, absolutely.
See, now you got to have the weatherall say, "Why do you want to search my car?"
There you go.
Right?
You have to be aware
if you have no reason, the answer is no.
Right. You have to be aware of your constitutional rights.
Right.
And that was a Fourth Amendment dodgy area, I guess I'll just say in retrospect. But
right. If there are exceptions. If they see contraband in plain view.
Yeah.
Okay. If you give them permission.
Yeah, that's
they have to get a warrant. If they have suspicion, they have to get a warrant. So, it's called the illegal search and seizure. That's another constitutional issue.
There you go. So in our last few minutes, tell me about the other class, which is sort of this wonderful thing about constitutional law, but also history, the constitutional cases that changed the direction of our country. Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay. There are landmark cases. For example, Miranda, the Shepard case, Roe versus Wade, that actually changed the Topeka, Kansas case versus the board, Brown versus the Board of Education.
Okay, this is integration of schools.
Correct. That changed the social, economic country, in the country. And these are very important. Brown versus the Board of Education eliminated separate but equal.
Exactly.
The Shepard case.
Which is a vestige of the Civil War.
Well, it's the Ferguson case in 1898, one of the worst cases that the Supreme Court ever found. You've got the Sam Shepard case that occurred right here in Cleveland.
Well, quickly go to the Ferguson case. Tell me why that was worse. That was
because that perpetrated separate but equal.
Okay, thank you.
Then they said, as long as the facility and the teachers are equal, Well, you take a look at what white schools looked like versus black schools, especially in the South. It was ridiculous.
Right, as the old jazz man is fond of saying, ain't necessarily so.
Correct. Correct. And Shepard, for example, the Shepard case defined the importance of a free press versus a fair trial. I mean, in the Shepard case, they had the media sitting inside the bar. I mean, Shepard couldn't even have a private conversation with his lawyer. They didn't sequester the jury,
right?
Which means they could go home and read the Cleveland Press, which was a yellow press at the time. It was absurd. It was a.
So a lot of these things, right, help people who may have been falsely accused, or even if they're not falsely accused, but help them preserve their constitutional rights.
What the Supreme Court does, it's part of a three-prong avenue of the government. It's the legislative to make legislation. It's the job of the executive to review that legislation.
So that's the Senate and the House of Representatives.
Correct.
They write the laws.
They write the laws. And the president is the one that he has the right to veto the law. The House of Representatives and the Congress has a right to override his veto. And then the Supreme Court has a right to review their actions.
An obligation.
To determine whether their actions are constitutional.
So I think your classes are fascinating, but they're also vitally important in today's society, because there's a lot of people running around out there that maybe took a class on the Constitution in high school or something like that, but that's been a long time for the folks over 55. And as our society continues to change and evolve, and not always in a good direction, your classes, I think, are vitally important that help people understand their constitutional rights better. Thanks so much, Avery.
I would hope so.
Thanks so much, Avery, for being with us today.
Glad to be here.